on the ideological character of. First edition, Tirana, September 12, 1969. Source, Journal of Verdad. HTML, Fernando S. Araujo, September 2008. Reproduction rights. Copying or distributing this document is free and indefinitely guaranteed under the terms of the GNU Free Documentation License. From ideological work, from the articles we constantly read in the press, as well as from the reports presented to us, it is clear that the party has to deal with gossip. I would now like to say a few words about the nature of these demonstrations, their sources, what they represent, and what their objective is, thinking that this might help to combat them. Gossip is a typical phenomenon of the petty bourgeoisie. It has a petty bourgeois character and is a manifestation of bourgeois ideology. Ill-intentioned gossip is the product of subjectivism and has nothing in common with sound, realistic, and constructive criticism. Quite the contrary, it has a denigrating and often slanderous character, whether intentional or not. Most of the time, it is unfounded gossip, and when it rarely involves a subject that has any concrete fact as its basis, it becomes denigrating due to the very form in which it is developed and the subjective judgment of the person interpreting the subject. Even in this case, from interpretation to interpretation by individuals who indulge in the harmful practice of gossip, it eventually becomes slander. This must be seen as a most odious method of criticism, typical of the petty bourgeoisie. There is no sane, principled, or constructive attitude in it because it distorts the facts, invents, intentionally or not, unverified circumstances. Because it proceeds from mouth to ear behind the back and to the detriment of the element it takes as its target. Gossip never aims to correct the person it targets. On the contrary, it does great harm to both the individual and the collective. Those who engage in this practice present themselves as moralists because they always disguise their malicious intentions with a high moral conception, when in reality it is an amoral conception. Whether because of the subjective spirit that inspires its formation, or because of the foundations on which it rests, or because of the forms it takes and the objectives it pursues. Those who resort to this gossip, which in fact can flourish in various fields, as a method with a supposedly political content, cannot themselves be imbued with a sound political conception. Because people who hold the subjectivist views that the petty bourgeois practice of gossip presupposes are never in a position to carry out a true analysis of the political situation by studying real facts objectively. The method of organizing work based on gossip cannot be a correct method of political analysis. Those who employ it are, we can say without fear of being mistaken, either opportunists or self-interested or sectarians or conservatives. In addition to the evils I have just mentioned, gossip gives rise to quarrels, disputes, and resentments that can even lead to murder. It causes disturbance in society, in its harmonious ideological and political unity. But it is also a form of class struggle on the part of the bourgeoisie that has been overthrown from power. To create difficulties for the dictatorship of the proletariat, to torment morally and in the most intimate things the same people of our society. It must be clearly understood that such a method, reactionary in content and character, will inevitably choose as its first target, in order to discredit and discredit them, precisely those who mercilessly combat gossip. To relentlessly combat gossip in the bourgeois and petty bourgeois forms in which it presents itself does not mean disguising the errors that have manifested themselves in any political, ideological, moral, or organizational sphere. On the contrary, criticism of these errors must be made, but it must be based on solid, open principles, well-founded on facts, formulated face-to-face or in front of the collective, at the time when it is necessary, and not based on mere assumptions. Criticism must in all circumstances be characterized by a moral, political, and ideological objective, have an educational function for the individual or collective being criticized, and never aim to morally crush the element in question, but, on the contrary, to raise their morale so that they can correct their errors. Finally, criticism directed at people who make mistakes in their private lives or in the workplace must not become a dominant concern that conceals, obscures, and hinders the fair solution of the main problems that concern the party and the state. I emphasize this because very often in the party's grassroots organizations, we see debates opening up that consist of individual mutual criticisms in ways that not only neglect the main problems and disrupt the life of the organization, but sometimes also break up its unity. Sometimes we console ourselves by saying that these criticisms are not political in nature. This assessment is wrong. They are political and ideological in nature, precisely because they have caused discord and division within the organization. This is not about criticizing those who make mistakes. They must be criticized without fail in the ways and for the reasons I mentioned above. But we must be careful to guard against criticisms based on intrigues of a subjectivist nature and their demoralizing and anti-educational effects. The party must therefore properly understand the dangerous aspect of gossip on the political, ideological, and organizational planes, so that it can be combated with rigor as it must be. If the danger it poses is not properly understood by the communists, if they fall into the practice of this petty bourgeois method in their lives, gossip will also creep into the party, which will then be in no position to combat this pernicious practice among the masses. Therefore, let us sharpen our vigilance and combat this harmful habit wherever it manifests itself, first of all in ourselves, in the party, and among the masses. In general, idle people indulge in gossip and idle chatter, but they are not the only ones who do so. First of all, we find this habit among people with a low level of political and ideological education, among those who indulge in a hollow cultural life, who do not live properly with the new ideas that the party and the masses develop and who do not fight to put them into practice. The bearers of this chatter are rotten elements with backward prejudices, or incapable of breaking with the archaic ways and forms of life, with the customs of the past. But there are also those who present themselves as modernized elements, but in whom this kind of modernization is nothing more than a degeneration of character and an even more dangerous refinement of the practice of gossip. In the past, time spent in a cafe or when people visited each other's homes was an opportunity for long conversations. You kill time, they said, but that was done by talking about one person and another and by scrutinizing their lives. This practice, although considerably improved, continues to this day. There are comrades who rightly complain about the opening of too many cafes. No order was given to open cafes one after the other. Therefore, the only ones responsible for this state of affairs are the comrades in the districts themselves, who complain about it and who themselves authorize it. If I raise this problem, it is not in order to close all the cafes, for that would not be a wise measure. However, this problem should not be considered solely from its commercial aspect. It should also be taken into account the necessary rest of the workers. Whether a cafe truly becomes a place of cultivated leisure depends, first and foremost, on the customers who frequent it, their mentality, their level of ideological and political education, and the intention with which they go there. If a person frequents a cafe to the point of neglecting his home and family, if he goes there to drink and get drunk, to badmouth everyone who comes and goes, or to create scandals, then the cafe becomes a place of gossip. It is clear that the responsibility lies not only with the place but also with its patrons. Thus, while it is true that we should not open too many cafes, it is first and foremost necessary to work towards educating people. Because if this first condition is not met, these uneducated people will then devote themselves to their misdeeds and invade our cultural establishments that are not called cafes, but which could easily become so. Therefore, we have much to do in the field of leadership and education of the working class and workers. How mistaken are the comrades who write to me in their letters with phrases like these. We have buried forever and deeply the laws of the 1. Canon of the Lek, the influence of religion has been suppressed, and other such statements, which show a lack of maturity. Of course, these comrades have no doubt that it is difficult to lull the party or myself to sleep with such resounding statements, but this is not an attempt, however unintentional, to lie. to mystify or to fail to understand the political, ideological, and social situation of the regions where these comrades work and live. The great results achieved represent only a fraction of what we must achieve, and to achieve this we still have to overcome many obstacles, which we cannot overcome otherwise than by fighting and putting in the effort. And not by empty words and boasting. Political and ideological elevation, well-organized work, and communist simplicity of character make it possible to overcome difficulties. All our daily political and achieve the desired successes. Top of page. 1. Reference to the Canon of Lech Dukagini, a collection of medieval norms, customs, and practices written by the priest Stefan Jakov, whose survival is still evident today in some regions of Albania. The canon was used by the clergy to preserve exploitation and keep the populations in ignorance. Translator's note. Return to text. Original text. Rate this translation your feedback.